Sometime 2 weeks ago, I put up a video in response to, which of course many of us have talked about, something that someone put out that was trending, and I put out a thought and response to it, and it made me think a little bit more about what exactly is happening right now. And I'm going to explain this, and it may seem like a lateral move, but it's not just critical for us, i.e. we're going to turn out to be better people. Hopefully we have a network and a community. That's nice, but that's not just the reason why. It is mission critical for the generation we're going to birth. Most of us here in our 20s, we're going to be people who start and own families. We're going to be people who are responsible for shaping the thought direction of people who come after us. And what exactly are we going to be teaching them? Who do we make ourselves to point to these other people? And they may not seem like very serious things or very serious questions at this point just yet, but they're incredibly important. So, philosophically, a post-truth era is an era where appeals to emotion and sentiments, so personal beliefs of different people that are sort of spun out by them, matter more than appeals to objective facts and scientific truth. So that's exactly what it means when we say we live in a post-truth era. And that's used to define the world we live in today. And that's an idea that has, been pervasive for, I would say, the past 20 years. And it made me think a lot about what exactly does it mean what are the consequences for us to be in an era of post-truth. What does it mean for us to participate in that, and how do we go back to discovering our truth? Because every society needs truth. Every civilization needs to agree on certain things in order for people to work collectively. As individuals, we all need to believe in certain things as true, right? So whether we are conscious of it or not, our actions in the world model the fact that we believe certain things to be true. So you're here today, you're here at 11 o'clock on a Saturday. It says something about what you believe to be true, right? Versus every other thing that you possibly could be doing now. So it's almost like there's a value system of truth, and some things stack on top and some things stack at the bottom. And we choose from the top, and that informs our actions in the world. So, our world is shaking in a way that's very new, and not even in a way that's philosophical, because I think it's been going on for, I'll say, the past 30 years, but in ways that are incredibly practical, that even the most laymen can see. There's something that's new that in many ways is struggling to be reborn. And we are at the cusp of new revelations. So new revelations that would sort of take us back to our fundamental truths for who we are. That's something new is struggling to be reborn. And the reason why the world is shaking in ways that are uncertain today is because the truth itself is under assault. And when the truth is under assault, then the very fabric of our lives, of what reality is under assault. And that's why there's so much catastrophe. That's why there's so much chaos. That's why there's so much confusion about who we are, about what our place in the world is, about what we should be doing with our lives. And so, just to back up a little bit, right? So what I've said is societies need collective systems of truth for them to work well and function properly. A long time ago, societies produced truth a very specific way. So in the Middle Ages, before the Middle Ages, the way most societies produced truth were relying on collective systems of identity. So if I wanted to understand what's true about you as an individual, it behoves on you to prove. So the truth about you in some ways is tied to your participation in the collective, your belonging to a specific commonwealth, right? So, and that's not just in the West, that's most societies. So if you, for example, and it happens in traditional African societies, when people want to validate the truth about who you are, they ask you, whose son are you or whose daughter are you? So there's this collective system of devising truth that we had, before the Middle Ages mostly, where if I want to know who you are, I ask where you're from and what family you belong to. And if you come from a family that's noble and reputable, then you as an individual entity, you disappear. No matter what sins you just committed, you disappear, and the covering of your family, your state, your commonwealth, sort of covers you. And it no longer matters who you are and what you as an individual have done. It matters the lineage you come from, the commonwealth, the society you come from. And that's what informs truth about you. The decisions you make for where to go to school, who to get married to, who you have as friends, what beliefs you have, they were embedded in collective cultural systems. I'm not saying that's ideal, by the way. I'm just saying that's how it was. But around the Middle Ages, that changed for very many complex reasons. And it went from a much more societal, broad-based definition of your identity based on where you belong to one where we relied on you as an individual to tell us the truth about who you are. And it changed for a very complex web of reasons. But the most specific reason why it changed in the Middle Ages specifically was due to the codification of the sacrament of penance. The Catholics here may know and understand that. The codification of the sacrament of penance by the Fourth Lateran Council at the beginning of the 13th century, in 1215 to be precise. It's a very interesting decree. The decree mandated that all Christians, irrespective of who you are, kneel before a priest at least once a year to confess all your transgressions without omitting a single one. That was the decree that, and as a result, a lot of confessional techniques were bettered. And confession, as it were, became an integral part of human society and how we developed and communicated truths about each other, to the other. And it permeated everything, from medicine to education to family relationships to intimate relationships, even to literature. So before this time, most literature were heroic accounts. And you can read literature before the 13th century. Heroic accounts about trials, bravery and sainthood and things like that. But it quickly evolved to literature, and that's mostly what we consume today. Literature that's based on the themes of redemption and forgiveness, where writers themselves had to pull confessions out from the deepest parts of themselves in between the words that they wrote, right? And that's confessional literature. A lot of what we consume today in movies, music, books is confessional literature. And we also like it with social media. We like creators who are vulnerable. Oh, they're so authentic because they confess to us things they like, things they don't like, the sins they've committed, the people who they love, like all their weird quirks. And we're deeply attracted to that. There's something about us that's called forth when we see people confess in such a manner. I'm just trying to walk you through how we got to the point where confession became a significant part of how we communicate to each other. In medicine, that's also a thing, and we have a few doctors, including Nonya, who will soon be a doctor. A lot of medical examination is confession, and we've built sort of codifications in medicine, in fields like law, to sort of protect this inducement to confess. In March 2016, few months before I turned 18 years old, I had my first anxiety attack ever. Like, I did not know what was going on. I thought I was going to die. And I was so confused as to what was happening. And so I decided to go to the hospital in Calabar without my parents' knowledge. They didn't know what was going on. And after waiting for so long, I went to see the doctor, and she was female. And usually for someone as young as I was, I would be accompanied by parents. So she asked me why I wasn't accompanied by my parents. I told her, I just wanted to talk to her privately. And she thought that was interesting. So she asked me what was happening. Of course, I had gone to WebMD to figure out all my symptoms. I knew exactly what it was. I'm like, I'm suffering anxiety. I don't know exactly why. And so she asked me in a very hushed tone, how many girlfriends do you have? And I thought it was a very stupid question. Why is she asking me how many girlfriends I have and asking me that in a hushed tone? But that's exactly what I'm describing. It's essentially, what sins have you been committing, young 17-year-old boy? Confess all of them to me. And that's exactly what it is. Exactly the same thing happens in law, where we have attorney-client privilege, and it protects people who probably have done things in the context of the legal system, where they talk to their lawyers and they can confess freely, essentially. So that very quickly permeated every aspect of society in ways that we don't notice, confession, as it were. The reason why I say this and linking it back to the topic of truth is the early Christians realized that there's no difference between confession and telling the truth. And that's something that's deeply profound, and our society knows that very deeply. Maybe it doesn't seem like that anymore, but we know that very deeply. And telling the truth, so telling the truth is a ritual in which you as an individual who tells the truth, right? The act of expression of the truth itself, regardless of what the consequences are, produces internal modifications in you. So even if your statement of the truth is an admission of your own guilt, the very act of telling the truth itself unburdens you of your wrongs, right? It purifies you, it redeems you, and ultimately leads you to salvation. The very act in itself of telling the truth. But it's a very hard thing to do, because there's some sort of latency that's intrinsic to telling the truth, right? It's almost, there's an element of force, let me put it this way, that's required for us to extract the truth. And in our criminal justice systems, torture is a permissible means for extracting the truth. And the reason why that's the case is because the truth by its very nature is something that tries to stay hidden. So the null hypothesis for us, our society, for each and every one of us is the truth, if we do nothing, is almost always going to stay hidden, right? It requires an external force to almost constantly act on it for it to get into action. And that's all of us here. We can be that external force. And that's exactly what people do when they go to therapy and pay $300 an hour. Why exactly do we go to therapy? We're not necessarily going to learn new information about ourselves that would help us change our lives. What we do when we go to therapy is to confess, literally. But we don't realize we're doing that. It's to confess truths about ourselves to the person on the other end, and hopefully use those truths that we confess as a means to unlock parts of us that are currently locked up in ourselves, right? And we do that through the carefully guided jolt of a therapist. Because if you already know these truths about yourself, they are in you. Most therapy sessions are, you talk, the therapist just listens. If you already know them, then why pay so much money to go tell them to someone else? There's something intrinsic about that, right? And the most fields that we have today, the field of psychology is really built on that. So we deeply recognize that. And that's why we pay to go to therapy. We almost expose ourselves to that semi-comfortable but clinically regulated form of torture, where we're exposed to a therapist, we have to confess to them, and it's that torture that is that jolt that we need. And hopefully we use those truths that we confess and what we learn from that to aid our way, to navigate our way through the world. And that's exactly what it means for the truth to set us free. That's exactly what we do in therapy. It's an exercise of telling the truth about ourselves in some way, being open to feedback, being open to receive feedback about ourselves based on that truth, and opening ourselves up to be set free in that way. And for our culture, the only thing that can set us free is the truth in very many ways. So I'm going to, finish this monologue with this. How do we find the truth? How do we know what the truth is? There's two types of truth, and this is not my idea. It's the idea of an old existentialist philosopher. His name is Søren Kierkegaard. There's objective truth and there's subjective truth. The difference between objective truth and subjective truth is the difference between knowing the truth, so knowing the facts of the truth, and being in the truth. And of the two, being in the truth is much more important than knowing the truth. And the difference here is you can intellectually embrace an elevated moral theory. There are a lot of things we know to be true. There are lots of things we know to be good. But in actual practice, we don't do them. And that's exactly the difference between objective truth and subjective truth. And objective truth is incredibly important, right? But it's known already. And it's not that useful when it comes to helping us figure out the unknown and helping us chart the course to our future. It's not that useful. If I say something like 2 + 2 is 4, we all, or a mixture of an acid and a base gives off salt and water. Those are scientific and mathematical truths that hold true at all times. I don't need faith. I don't need to, if I say I don't believe in that, like that's absurd. Like I don't need to believe in 2 plus 2 is 4. They hold true at all times. But if someone tells you, I trust you, or I love you, which, by the way, when last did someone tell some of you that? This cool, love that for you. So if someone tells you that, or something like "I believe you," that's such a subjective truth that requires an incredible amount of faith, commitment, and reciprocity to hold true. And that's exactly what truth is. That's exactly what faith is. It requires skin in the game. It requires people to put themselves on the line. It's almost like I'm going to take a risk, but there's no security of a certain outcome. And that's exactly what real truths are. You're being in the truth when you're exposed in that sense. And that's how we all should be walking. It's almost like the truth. The truth in itself is not a set of doctrines to be understood. It's almost like a divine being to be encountered, right? And the encountering of that divine being illuminates us and washes us clean. And it unburdens us of our wrongs. And there are some certain encounters that the person who is involved in the encounter, i.e. you and I, needs to be in a very specific condition in order to make the most of that experience, right? The absence of truth for us in our lives and in our culture creates a vacuum. It creates a vacuum. We're living in that vacuum, whether or not we realize it. And that vacuum takes the form of spiritual thirst. And there's nothing finite that can quench spiritual thirst. Not a new gender, not new pronouns, not a new husband, not a new wife, not money, not cars. None of those things can quench spiritual thirst. The only thing that can quench spiritual thirst is an encounter with the divine. How do we encounter the divine? We encounter the divine by embodying an incredible spirit of truth. That's the only way. That's the only way. That doesn't mean we're not going to be wrong. But what that means is that if we live in truth, we open ourselves up to be corrected by other people, by society, and especially by ourselves when we're wrong. And we sort of just update our models for what the truth means. Why am I saying all of this? The reason why I'm saying all of this is because it behoves on us to decide what lives we're going to live. It behoves on us to make the decisions now for who we're going to be. It behoves on us now to tell ourselves the truth about who we are, about what society we want to participate in, and to not be people who hold back from speaking up when the conditions around us are lies. And in many ways, sometimes we inadvertently participate in them. So can we be people who maybe do less of that, right? Maybe the reason why our government, maybe the reason why all the tyrants in our lives are so big, our fathers, our mothers, our boyfriends, our girlfriends, the reason why they're so tyrannical and so big is because we become so small. So maybe let's grow a little bigger. And we only do that by telling ourselves the truth, by living in the truth, not just knowing things objectively, but putting some skin in the game and risking being wrong and seeing how things go. Maybe that internal modification that arises as a result of the encounter with the divine will accrue to us, and lead us to salvation. I'm going to stop there. That's probably a good place to stop.